Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Good evening to all of you, and welcome back to our Teresian birthday bash. We're doing a little birthday party for St. Teresa of Jesus, St. Teresa of Avila, on her 500th birthday, born March 28th, 1515. And so for the whole year, we're doing, throughout the world, there are celebrations in honor of St. Teresa of Avila, Doctor of the Church, declared doctor by Pope Paul VI back in 1970, along with St. Catherine of Siena. And since that time, we have two more doctors, one of them being a Carmelite, St. Teresa of Lisieux, one of her spiritual daughters, being named the Doctor of the Church in 1997, 100 years after her death. And so we're continuing our reflections on St. Teresa of Jesus, and we're looking at the writings of St. Teresa, which are numerous or significant classics of the Western spirituality. Certainly would include not the series, but as classics, certainly the book of her life, which we looked at initially a few weeks back, and where she spoke about that beautiful image of water, and drawing water to water the garden, and the bridegroom, the gardener, the one who owns the garden, loves to take his walks in the evening and smell the flowers and take pleasure in the garden of the soul. And so she spoke about those four waters, and that was a book that was written as she was trying to open her soul to her confessant, to learned men, to make sure that she was on the right path, that she wasn't being deceived, because as we spoke about basically in every class, about the context in Spain, the context in the church, and certainly the context in spirituality. There was a lot of suspicion concerning women going deeper in prayer, anybody going deeper in prayer, particularly women, because of some abuses that happened, and of course there was suspicion. The Inquisition was looking into certain abuses in monasteries, and so we spoke about that, and because of that she was commanded to write, and so she wrote the book of her life as a act of obedience, and basically about her own prayer life. And then we looked last time at the interior castle, which was certainly the la creme de creme, if you will, but it's certainly the Magna Carta of her writing, of her literature corpus, that of this very powerful work of describing the soul having different mansions and the king dwelling in the middle, and in the progress of the soul. That was written later in her life, probably we think around maybe 1577 or so, about 5 years before she died. She was already in the mystical marriage, and so she had advanced probably from, say, 6th mansion to 7th mansion in the last 5 years, last 10 years of her life, but 5 years prior to her beginning to write the interior castle. And we looked at that last time from the point of view of progression from being off the front porch to the master bedroom, if you will, on the 3rd floor, or into the center innermost dwelling places, and how that's called. We're all called to that, and the progress. So describing it and speaking about some of the obstacles that we face in being drawn closer to the king. And then a little out of chronological order, we want to look today at The Way of Perfection, a work that Teresa of Jesus wrote, again out of obedience, all these out of obedience. She wrote the interior castle out of obedience because the book she was explaining to a priest about prayer, and she said, I wish I had my book with me. I wrote about these things, but it's with the Inquisition. The Inquisition had seized it, and it was not available, and they didn't have photocopy. They didn't have like a jump drive, you see. You go look at it on the computer, obviously. So the manuscript was with the Inquisition, and so he says, so he ordered her to write these things and expound further. So that's how we get the interior castle. And then now this particular work, The Way of Perfection, which was written actually before the interior castle. It was written about 1566, but already the reform had started, and Teresa of Jesus had already founded her first monastery, St. Joseph's, and it was his sisters who were asking for something on prayer. And of course, the book of prayer had not yet been taken by the Inquisition, and Father Domingo Ibanez had it, who was a theologian at St. Thomas University in Avila, And so it was also her confessor, and he asked her to get it because his sisters wanted to read it. And he says no, and he threatened to burn it. So it was kind of suspect. It was obviously solid teaching, but it was uneasy that sisters unexperienced would be reading things and get confused or maybe practice things they shouldn't practice. So he wouldn't allow the sisters of St. Joseph to read it. So they kept, you see, on Mother Teresa of Jesus' case and said, write us something about prayer, write us something about prayer. And so because confessor wouldn't release the book that she already wrote, she decided to, she was obedient. She decided to be obedient to my sisters, who were her inferiors, but she was obedient to them and began to set into writing, with the permission of her confessor, to write some things on prayer. And of course, that's how we that's where we get the way of perfection, which was some counsel and advice of St. Teresa of Jesus for her sisters. So unlike the Interior Castle, which was written, you see, out of obedience, Garcia de Toledo, you see, Gratian rather Toledo, which one of the founders with John of the Cross of the Reform, unlike the book of the life or whatever, that was also written in obedience about her own life. This was written out of obedience to her sisters, because her sisters wanted some teaching, some directives, and so that's what we have, and we want to look at today, this way of perfection. And so, it's kind of a mixed bag in a sense, is because she wrote for her sisters, and her sisters, some wanted to know teaching about high contemplation, about the perfect contemplation, or the heights of prayer. Others just said, look, just write to us about contemplation. We just want to become contemplatives, and we don't care about perfect contemplation just yet, but just, give us something on contemplation so we can become more supernatural in our prayer. Others were saying, forget that, just teach me how to pray. I can't even pray my Our Father, my prayers, vocal prayers. So she is trying to write for all of them, and they're in different places, if you will. And so she takes their needs, their concerns, responds to their request, and then writes this El Camino de Perfección, this path, this way of perfection. And so it's written about 1566, and the second redaction, of course, she turns it in, and the censor comes up with about 50 corrections, and rip on some pages and stuff. So she had to redact it again. And so it was probably done shortly thereafter. It was always thought to be done around 1569, 1570, a number of years later, but now historical evidence, critical editions seem to think that it was done pretty quickly after she got her corrected copy back from the census. However, when these things were revised, the second redaction, we have one in one of the monasteries, and so this Otilio Rodriguez and Kavanaugh edition uses ample footnotes and goes to that first redaction and puts a lot of the quotations as she had it in the first redaction. So there's a lot of redactions, not a lot of redactions, but a lot of changes that were recommended, and so we have them in this particular text. Very interesting. Teresa here is very, very practical. Now, she's a very practical woman. She's a great psychologist. She's very with her feet on the ground. But when you read the Interior Castle, it's pretty lofty, and certainly with the book of her life as well, book of the life, which is really about a book on prayer. There's a lot of flights and swooning going on, and so you don't get that little practical, nitty-gritty things that you get in the way of perfection. Way of perfection, it's really nuts and bolts. And she goes off in prayer. She treats the whole gamut of the progress of prayer, and at the same time, she's dealing with the way to get there, and the disposition necessary, and the little nitty-gritty stuff that she says a lot of confessors and a lot of priests and a lot of books on prayer and mental prayer don't speak about, because they're beyond these things. And she says, sisters, we're not, and so we better talk about these things because they're very important. So it's delightful, and we get a lot of practical, and since she's writing for her sisters, she's very bold and very frank. And so we see some we get the real personality of Teresa of Jesus, like in her letters. We get it here in the Way of Perfection. Now, you have to know, she writes the Way of Perfection for her sisters, who are part of this Teresian Carmel. So it's a reform of the Carmelites started by Mother Teresa of Avila, of Jesus, and it's a going back to the primitive rule of St. Albert. And so basically what she's doing is she's doing a commentary on their constitutions, explaining to them the importance of these things, addressing from her experience problems, and she is giving them the whole reason for the Carmel reform, why we had to have a reform, and why, and their vocation, what they're doing. So she's speaking to sisters. So she's going to address the counsels, poverty, chastity, and obedience, mainly poverty and obedience, but chastity as well, indirectly, obliquely through friendships. And she's going to speak about their solitary way of life, because they're not just cloistered, removed from the world, but they live a solitary life. So the Carmel tradition, you know, from time of Albert of Jerusalem, the rule of Albert, patriarch of Jerusalem, who wrote the rule for the hermits that were gathered on Mount Carmel in the 12th century and 13th century. This rule spoke about hermits, the hermits who were living kind of a community, almost like a Carthusian type community, but a solitary life. So they had to be hermits. They were living a solitary life while in community. They had community, and she's going to emphasize and demand love of neighbor, so fraternal charity, and at the same time this importance of being alone to be more disposed for intimacy with Christ the King. And so she's writing for them. And so we would say, well, why even bother? Because you are not cloistered Carmelites. And she's writing for cloistered Carmelites. She's a doctor of prayer, and she's a doctor, universal doctor of the church. And what she has to say here is very important with regard to the progression of prayer, some repetition from what we've already treated in the book of her life, as well as in the interior castle. She's not contradicting anything that was said there. And yet some very, very practical points for all of us with regard to how to arrive at drinking of the fountain of life. The fountain of life, drinking, that's very fitting with today's Feast of the Sacred Heart. You will draw water with joy from the side of the Savior, on the intimacy of drinking the Spirit, you see, from the heart of Christ. This intimacy, this is the goal of perfect contemplation, to be able to be in union that we are, you see, drinking of the living waters according to our capacity, definitively in eternity, but now already in this life. And so she is tracing the way to arrive at that, to get our thirst satiated with the waters that come from the heart of Christ. You know, she's not using that language of the heart of Christ, but she speaks much about water. It's her favorite motif, and she spoke about it so far in every one of her writings. And of course, it comes as an antiphon that repeats itself here about drinking from the fountain, you see, of life, drinking from these living waters. Okay? So she's not speaking about so much the different modes or ways of drawing water she did in the book of her life, but the goal is drinking of these living waters. Okay, and that's where the soul satiates its thirst from from Christ, the bridegroom, and that spousal relationship. So it's a very, I think, fitting. And our reading from Matthew, which is a reading for the one of the readings for the cycle of readings for the Sacred Heart of Jesus, speaking about "Learn of me, for I am meek and humble of heart." Of course, this is a virtue that Teresa of Jesus emphasized, as all the saints do. But it's a litany that continues to repeat itself in all of her works about humility, humility, humility. My dear sisters, humility. St. Augustine, 3 steps to sanctity, or number 1, humility; number 2, humility; number 3, humility. But it's that fundamental. And of course, when she speaks about charity, she speaks about detachment. She says there's no such thing as love without humility, and you really can't speak about this humility, Christian humility, without love. Augustine says, I've seen all the virtues, all the Catholic Christian virtues lived out and taught in a very exceptional way by the philosophers in the different schools of thought in my journey to Catholicism. But he says 2 virtues I've never seen, I've never heard taught, and I've never seen them lived in all of my instructors up to this point. And these are the 2 distinctively Christian virtues. And that's charity, which is the crown. You see, God is love, Christian charity, and humility. Humility was seen as actually a vice by the ancients. And so this meekness, this kindness when they're hurting you, this bearing of calumny, this taking the blame when it's not your fault and not looking for your own rights, this not holding yourself in such honor and asking for your rights, this meekness, this gentleness, and this kindness when you're being attacked by another, and this humility of heart. Really, it's the only virtue that Jesus told us to learn in a command. So he didn't say, learn of me charity, learn of me chastity, learn of me obedience. He said, learn of me poverty, detachment. Learn of me, I am meek and humble of heart. And that's the heart of Jesus. O Jesus, meek and humble of heart, make my heart like unto thine. That's a little prayer that, as you know, if you come to confession, I often give it because I received it with much fruit in one confession, so I give it back, hopefully with equal fruit. So this is the background. She says in this work that. Let me back up. Again, the background, the two extremes, and we've mentioned these before, but the two extremes that were present in spirituality in this Catholic culture was that of a skepticism, or a suspicion rather, of mental prayer. And many of these books on mental prayer ended up in 1559. She's writing in 1566, but in 1559, there was an index of books, which meant they were forbidden to be read by Catholics and by nuns and stuff. And they were almost all books on prayer, and particularly mental prayer. So all the good books that Teresa of Jesus was using and that had been fruitful for her and she was trying to recommend to her sisters were no longer available because they had pulled them. They had pulled the books and they were no longer available. So that was one thing, a suspicion of this mental prayer, of this of prayer which would kind of go beyond just rote prayers. So whether it be interior meditation or interior adoration, that was frowned upon by many. Others, for example, had a disdain, just the other extreme, a disdain for vocal prayers. Now, we kind of went through this after the council. After the council, devotions, statuaries, images, it was very similar to what Teresa of Jesus was dealing with, because in the time of the church, at that time, you had a great iconoclasm, and you had Lutheranism, and you had all the Protestant Reformation happening, and they were throwing out all the devotions and prayers and Marian devotion, all this was being attacked. And of course the Eucharist churches were being destroyed. And so this caused St. Teresa of Avila no little consternation. Of course she continues to speak about this throughout her writings. And the reform is a response to this. So the Teresian reform was like the Jesuits, it was a Catholic Reformation. It was a Catholic counter-Reformation. So to go against what was being disrupted in Protestantism in the early 16th century. So you had the other extreme going on at the time where they were not trusting vocal prayers. Vocal prayers were for like kids. We don't do vocal prayers. And so everything had to be a deeper prayer. So we're all mystics. After Vatican II, a lot of destroying of statuary, no longer venerating relics, getting rid of devotions. And we're like all mystics. So even monasteries that had beautiful statues and images staying, they gutted them. And we're supposed to be all like already in heaven. Of course, Teresa of Jesus cuts through this and is very adamant. The Congregation for Doctrine of Faith cited her that you can never pass beyond the humanity of Jesus. Even seeing God face to face in eternity is going to be through the humanity of Jesus. And so we can never bypass or go beyond, if you will, the humanity of Jesus. And so the importance of images for Teresa of Jesus and the importance of vocal prayer. So Teresa, in writing her instruction to the sisters, is writing in this context, and you're going to see her steering between these two extremes and showing that virtue stat in medio, that is going to actually stands between two extremes, an excess and a defect. And of course, that's a great contribution. This holiness, holy people always get it right. They always have balance, and they always have that virtue, that suavité, if you will, that cuts between two extremes. And so, the way it's organized this is in volume 2 of the collected works by the Carmelite Studies edition. and with Kieran Cavanaugh and Otilio Rodriguez, translators. This particularly, the Way of Perfection, the original one had 72 chapters. It's a relatively lengthy work, and then when she redacted it after some of the corrections, she put it back into 42 chapters, or she changed the, not shortening it, but extending, putting things together in her organization. So Teresa of Avila actually organized the chapters and wrote the little headings. And so she put it into 42 chapters. So you have 42 chapters, and basically the way it's broken up is the first couple of chapters, chapter 1, 2, 3, after a little introduction saying this is advice and counsel of Teresa of Jesus to her sisters at St. Joseph. After giving a little introduction, she starts with chapter 1, 2, and 3, and basically there just summarizes why there's a Teresian Carmel, why we're here, why have we come. And so she makes it very clear about where they've come. So that's chapters 1, 2, 3. And then from 4 to 15, you see here she speaks about that in order to accomplish the end for which they have come, they need 3 fundamental virtues, and she describes these in these chapters, about 10 chapters, 11 chapters, and that of love of neighbor, okay, love of neighbor, and then detachment, being detached from the world. Of course, they're religious, and they vow to leave the world behind, and then thirdly, this humility, a humility which is that fundamental virtue. And of course, she treats humility and detachment very closely together in these last chapters after she treats love of neighbor. So that's this second section in the Way of Perfection. So chapters 4 through 15, and then in 16 through 18, 16, 17, and 18, she has 3 chapters. This is often cited in the controversy about whether all are called to be contemplatives or not. Of course, contemplation and contemplative is a word that is, it depends on what people mean when they say it. So it's very difficult, and a lot of times people, they're on the same side of the point, but they're arguing because they're using the word differently. But nonetheless, 16, 17, 18 speaks about the different ways by which God leads people. Even, and she's speaking about in a Carmelite contemplative monastery, that there's different ways in this house of Carmel, St. Joseph's in particular, that God leads people. And of course, what she's saying is that it's like the house of Martha, and Jesus is in the house of Martha. And you got a lot of people in that house, and they're doing different things, and they're all serving the master. And so if God wants one to cook, let her cook. If he wants another to wipe and kiss his feet, let her wipe and kiss the feet. If he wants one to get up and go get some andouille or something, let her get up and go get the andouille. It's all about serving the Lord. And so they can't all, you see, doing this and doing that. And so they have to be able to respect the different ways that God wants to serve. Now, we certainly apply that to the church, you see, in its entirety, but even within the monastery. Now, what she's speaking about here, and this is going to give a background for what she's writing about, is because some of the sisters are having trouble with mental prayer, and some of them they're not contemplative. They're not having all these favors, and they're not being able to be quiet in prayer, and they're getting distracted. And so, do I have a vocation or not to a contemplative monastery? So she's dealing with that particular issue. We're going to see how she handles that. So that's chapters 16, 17, and 18. And then from chapter 19, I guess about maybe 7, 8 chapters. 19 to 26, she gives us some teaching about prayer in general. So just some principles about prayer overall. And that's in that particular section, she is actually citing, quoting, in one way, she's making reference to taking her books away from them. You see, that the Inquisition has put these books on index, and they don't have these books. Well, she doesn't have her book, by the way, because the theologian has it, and he won't turn it over, her confessor, because he thinks it's dangerous for the sisters. Eventually, it's going to go to the Inquisition, and they're going to have it for a while, and then that's why she writes Interior Castle. It'll eventually come back. So that's the context, and she's speaking about prayer, and she's speaking about all these fears and how the devil has all these fears about prayer and different, and so she lays it out there and gives the background about the Our Father, because basically they're saying that you got vocal prayer, Our Father and Hail Mary, that's enough. You know these books on praying. So yeah, you're right, that is enough. And then she proceeds to go on from chapters 27 to 42. So basically about 15 chapters where she describes in, not a commentary, she says not a commentary, but some thoughts about the Our Father. Now, you know the Our Father has always been seen by the fathers of the church as a compendium, a summary of the gospel, that the whole gospel is present, if you will, in that Our Father. And in many ways, the fathers of the church will say every prayer, you can't utter a prayer. If it's not in the Our Father, you shouldn't utter it. It's not a good prayer. So it's not a true prayer unless it's contained in some way in the Our Father. So the fathers of the church have long spoken and given their commentaries on the Our Father. And giving the Our Father was part of the RCIA program, giving them the creed and giving the Our Father and a commenting upon it. The bishops would comment upon the Lord's Prayer. So Teresa of Jesus ends up commenting. She didn't set out to do so, but she ends up setting out on it because the pundits say the Our Father should be enough. Just say your Our Father and don't worry about being a contemplative. And she's saying, well, that's ridiculous, because you can't say the Our Father unless you practice mental prayer. It's not worth praying. And then that's how she develops, you see, her teaching with the Our Father, and basically covering from vocal prayer not really being worthy of prayer unless it includes mental prayer. So she defines mental prayer and speaks about how mental prayer is so important for our vocal prayers, and then progresses through the Our Father with the petitions of the Our Father and describing as she goes the movement from mental prayer, which is something that we do, vocal and mental prayer, through the assistance of grace, God's grace, but our efforts, and come to a certain recollection, a certain kind of collecting, if you will, or enclosing, if you will, the faculties through our own effort and assisted by God's grace. And then the prayer of quiet, which is the will being captured by God, and the intellect, the other two faculties, the intellect, and for her, the memory and imagination, being left free to whine and complain or run here and there. And then the prayer of union, where the intellect also is taken into possession with the other faculties, and to this prayer of union. And then, of course, this perfect contemplation of drinking from the stream, and then praying for death, that it might be definitive in eternity. So that's the progression of this work, The Way of Perfection. Now, that's a long introduction or a long summary. But what I'd like to do is, I think, kind of go through this. It's 42 chapters, but as we progress, just to highlight some points, because in no way can we do it all. But I gave you the overview so that so that you'll have some understanding of the gamut. But as we go, with regard to going to chapter 1, 2, and 3. 2 is really, chapter 2 it becomes a little diversion. Teresa, as you know, is busy with many things, and she doesn't write for a while. She picks up a pen. She never reads over what she writes. And of course, she gets distracted. She goes off on something that's very important, but has not a whole lot to do with what she set out to do. So that's, for some people, could be a difficulty. But it can be very delightful too, I find it, because it's all very, very good stuff. So tangents, she goes off as a tangent. So chapter 2 is a whole tangent. But you look at chapter 1, and basically what she's saying is that the Lord has so few, he has so many enemies. Now she's speaking about the Protestant Reformation. And we wouldn't do that in ecumenism today to speak that way, but that was the situation. So he has so many enemies within the church, but also those who are attacking what is sacred, the priesthood, the sacraments, religious imagery, statues, the prayers, the whole life of prayer. And she said, yes, so few friends, so many enemies and so few friends, that these few friends should be good ones. Okay. Now that's the reason for the Teresian reform, because it's to be able to help cultivate and form good friends of the Lord, all right, dear friends. So she says, as a result, I resolved to do the little that was in my power. That is, to follow the evangelical counsels as perfect as I could, to take poverty, chastity, and obedience, to live Jesus' way of life on earth, that's consecrated life, to do it with others, that's religious life, and to strive that these few persons who live here do the same. So she said, I'm going to do that. That's my little part. I can't do much. I can't go preach the gospel. I'm not learned. I'm not like these theologians, and I'm not learned. I can't preach, and I can't be making mass and hearing confessions. But what can I do? Well, I can live as perfect as I'm able the evangelical counsels, and to become a good friend of Jesus. To be a good friend of Jesus and to encourage and to make sure that these that live in this house with me will do the same. Because he has so few friends that he needs some good ones. And now what are these good friends are going to do? All right. The good friends say, okay, well, we need to be occupied in prayer. Why? Because she says, I'm convinced that salvation and getting us out of this pickle that we're in right now in the 16th century with this Protestant Reformation and all this abuse going on in the church, that it's not going to be through the secular arm. The secular arm of the church, you got to realize, like King Philip and the armies, and they were having battles and stuff. They were trying to defend, you see, in these religious wars, defend from churches being sacked, people being killed, and so you had the religious wars. And so she said, I'm convinced it's not going to be through that. It's not going to be our Catholic kings that are going to win the battle. It's going to be through the ecclesiastical arm. Okay, the ecclesial arm of the church was, she said, the learned men, the priest, the bishop, the preachers, who are going to be able to bring, you see, and educate and bring people back to the true faith and bring them into deep union with God. But she says these defenders of the church, these ecclesial arm, needs prayer. And she said in battle, they're fighting. But one of the most important aspects of battle formation, this is, of course, at the time of Spain, is the standard bearer. You know, Ignatius uses the standard bearer in his Ignatian exercise, one of his exercises. The standard bearer is the one who holds the flag on the standard and holds it way up high so everybody knows how you line up. I don't know if you do dance recitals or you're in band or you're quarterback. Depending on where the ball is and where it is in the field, you line up, and everybody lines up in relationship to the center and the quarterback. And so the standard bearer is up there, but the standard bearer is both hands and carries no weapons. That's the contemplative. That's, you see, this good friend of Jesus. And so they have to be there, and they don't get to defend themselves. And no matter what happens, and they get shot at or they get hurt, they have to resist all kinds of suffering and not drop the standard. Because if the standard bearer drops the standard, then the whole, you see, battle is lost because they get scattered. This is like Moses up on the mountain, and he's praying, and as long as Moses prays with his hands lifted up to heaven, then the Israelites get the better of the battle. But as soon as Moses got tired, and he started to get fatigué, and he started lowering his arms, then the Amalekites started to mow down the Israelites. And so the good Joshua and her, you see, got up there, and they put him a sadia, a cathedra, and then they held his hands up. So that's the friends of God, keeping the standard bearer up. That's Saint Teresa and her sisters. That's holiness in the church. That's the contemplatives in the church. That's the living waters that are under the surface that cause the big trees to stay green, you see, all year round, even when there's a drought. Okay, it's the underground stream. Contemplatives' souls are like an underground stream. That was Balthasar, I think, in his book on prayer, about supernatural prayer. So that's the reality. And so she says that we would all be occupied in prayer for those who are defenders of the church and for preachers and for learned men who protect her from attack. We could help as much as possible this Lord of mine who is so roughly treated by those for whom he has done so much good. Okay. So this is a praying for the defenders of the church. And twofold. Number one, that they would become perfect. That the captains would become perfect, that those in battle would become holy. So praying like for priests and the theologians and the defenders and the Pope, that they would become saintly, through the prayers of Teresa and her sisters, through their contempt, their being good friends of Jesus, okay? And then number two, that, you see, they would be protected. They would be protected in their work. So praying for their perfection and praying for their protection was the two petitions, the two reasons why you had a Teresian Carmel. And okay, so what they had to do, they had to become good friends. All right. And so she does, chapter 2 is all about holy poverty and some very interesting things. I mean, I can see it now. We're not going to get through this. But Teresa, of course, poverty, she's speaking about the counsel. So being faithful, I want to be a good friend. I have to be a man of my word, be one of my word. And we have to live what we promise. And she's going to say that in the Our Father, about thy will be done. She said, don't pray that unless you mean it. You see, thy will be done. And of course, with our will, we've spoken our word to God, to be faithful to our word. Now she's talking about buildings, okay? They're worried about food, and they're worried about clothing, which Jesus said for nobody to worry about in his Sermon on the Mount. But she says, we must desire to observe poverty in every way, in houses, in clothing, in our words, and most of all in our thoughts. Okay, that's spiritual poverty, or the virtue poverty. She says, surely if poverty is truly observed, recollection and all the other virtues will be much better fortified than with very sumptuous buildings. Now, St. Teresa of Calcutta, Blessed Teresa of Calcutta, you know, she did read Teresa of Jesus, and she cites a number of things from her without saying it's coming from Teresa of Jesus. But Teresa of Jesus said that poverty is so important because if you have poverty, it protects chastity, and all the other virtues tend to come with it if we're doing poverty for the right reasons. Okay? And of course, they took vows of poverty. Now, Incarnacion, where she was, it had, some of the sisters had 5 or 6 rooms. They had slaves and servants, depending on the dowry that they had. If they were high, you know, wealthy, or they might have been very, very poor, and they might have slept in a dormitory. So there was a lot of class distinction in the big monastery of Incarnacion, which had about 180 nuns. And of course, a lot of traffic because of relatives and friends, and so it was like a Walmart, you know, it was an active monastery. So she goes, be careful of buildings like these. I beg you for the love of God and by his precious blood. And if I can say this in good conscience, may such a building fall to the ground to the day you construct one. Now, in the original, and they made a change it, it said, may it fall to the ground that I will pray to God. And I will certainly pray to God after I'm gone that the building would fall down to the ground and crash and kill you all. All right, so she was not in favor of fancy buildings for the nuns. All right. And then she said, it looks very bad. My daughters have large houses are built with money from the poor. Okay. May God not allow it. The houses must be poor and small in every way. Let us in some manner resemble our king who had no house but the stable in Bethlehem where he was born and the cross where he died. Okay. Well, anyway, this is a diversion, but a delightful one and an important one. Then she goes back to chapter 3, where she continues, you see, to speak about the force of arms and the standard bearer and the prayer for the ecclesiastics. And basically, the role of the Teresian Carmel, number 1, that among the numerous learned men and religious, there may be many who will meet these requirements I mentioned that are necessary for this battle. And basically perfect and to reach perfection. And then number 2, that after being placed in this combat, that they may receive protection and not falter, you see, or protection from the. So to be perfect and to be protected, and this is what Carmel does. Now, then she moves into 4 through 15 to speak about the foundations of prayer. And before she does so, she has some great. Teresa of Jesus was a very great feminist. So she starts complaining about all these priests who are saying that women, you know, are dangerous and they shouldn't be praying and they're going to get all confused and they make a big... So she goes on, you see, in a very humble but very cutting way to deal with these accusations. And then in chapter 4, she goes on to speak about that if we're going to pray unceasingly, and the rule of Albert says that we pray unceasingly. And Jesus commanded that we pray unceasingly. And Paul says, you see, Jesus says, watch, you see, and pray, and do not lose heart. Luke chapter 18, parables about the importance of praying always and not losing heart. You mean with the importunate widow and the judge, and when it wants some bread in the house. So these parables of prayer in Luke 18. But then Paul in Thessalonians saying that we have to pray constantly and be always in prayer. And of course, Augustine in his letter to Probus speaking about how can we pray constantly when I got to do this and do that, I got to sleep at night, and speaking about how we develop unceasing prayer. So Teresa of Jesus says we are to pray unceasingly, and we're going to be perfect. We need to be moving toward perfection, to be able to be dear friends of the Master, who has so few, that his few would be good ones, and to be able to accomplish this ecclesial task of taking care of the ecclesial arm, which is going to win this battle. And they can't do it without us doing our part in praying, living the counsels perfectly, following the rules, and praying unceasingly. She said to pray unceasingly, we need peace. We have to be at peace. We have to have peace to be able to pray unceasingly. And so she says the path, this peace that's necessary to be able to pray unceasingly and to drink of these waters of the fountain, we need 3 things, 3 virtues that she emphasizes. And in these chapters, 4 through 15, she develops them. And that's this love of neighbor, that I have to love my neighbor. And of course, in the monastery, it's going to be some guests and people that are going to visit from time to time, but it's going to be the sisters I live with. That's what she's saying, love of neighbor in St. Joseph. And then number 2, detachment, the necessity of detachment. And then thirdly, humility. And humility is not third in importance. She said, though I'm speaking about it last, it is the most fundamental and the most important of these virtues that she's speaking about. All right, so she says, I'm not beseeching you to do something new, but rather what the gospel requires and what we vow to do. I shall enlarge on only 3 things, she says, which are from our own constitution. So she's commenting on the constitutions of their society. For it is very important that we understand how much the practice of these 3 things, these 3 virtues, help us to possess inwardly and outwardly the peace that our Lord recommended so highly to us. Just read the sermon, the last supper discourse. The first of these is love of one another. So I give you a new commandment, love one another. Love one another. We hear this throughout the last supper discourse. The second is detachment from all created things. Detachment from all created things. And we'll see what she means. Third is true humility, which even though I speak of it last, is the main practice and embraces all the others. So humility. All right. So she goes on. Now, it's interesting, in chapter 4, she starts to write about love and different kinds of love, spiritual love, and that's kind of mixed with some, you see, some attachment or some selfishness, and pure love, and she rips it out, and then she rewrites it, and so she goes through. She had trouble articulating this section on love. But she treats some very practical things. She speaks, for example, of excess, the excess of the virtue and the defect. The lack of love for one another and too much love for one another. Now, what do you mean by too much love? Well, she speaks here about, we call particular friendships. You see, particular friendships. This is not something that's spoken about in lay communities very much, but particular friendships means that of the sisters in the house, I get close to a particular one. And so I want to spend time with this one. And I wish I had some money so I could give her a gift, you see, or him a gift if it's a male community. But it's spending too much, being preoccupied with one particular person. Doesn't mean it's unchaste necessarily. It means it's a particular. And so it's a small house, but I'm attached to this particular one. I'm loving this one in a certain way, in a particular way, which is going to cause problems in the community. And it's going to make me perhaps attached, but it is an excess of love. So this becomes dangerous. And Teresa of Jesus spends quite a bit of time speaking about that, this excess. She says, what does it do if I have a particular friendship? All right. It's not about not having friendship, because she's going to speak about spiritual friendships. But she says, failing to love equally all the others. So I'm not going to love you equally because I got my little shoot, you see, that I'm going to love more than the others. Feeling sorry about any affront to the friend. So anything that might happen to this friend of mine, I'm going to be moping about it, you see. Looking for time to speak with her. So I'm looking for an opportunity to speak to her, and we're living a life of silence, okay? So that's a problem, okay, in a contemplative monastery. And often so as to tell her that I hold her dear and other trifling things rather than about your love for God. So talking about how much I love you rather than about how much I love God. Okay, that becomes, the devil can feed that, and it detracts me from my love for God. These great friendships are seldom directed toward helping one love God more. On the contrary, I think the devil gets them started so as to promote factions in religious orders. So we have to be careful that our love remains pure and it remains motivated by the love of God. And so what does she says? She says, look, that we're not a large community, and houses where there are no more than 13. They had the 12 apostles and Jesus, then they got 14, the 12 apostles, Jesus and Mary, but they were always small, a dozen, 13, because Incarnacion with 180, it was too much. And so a small community. So she wanted many small communities where you could control the silence, the solitude. But she considered that a small community, 13. She says, in these kind of communities, all must be friends, all must be loved, all must be held dear, all must be helped. Watch out for these friendships for the love of the Lord, however holy they may be. Even among brothers, they can be poisonous. I see no benefit in them. Okay, so this is her concern about excess, you see, of love. Okay, and then of course she says some remedies of that. We got an horarium. The bell rings. Well, you see, and follow the rule. The rule's kind of set up with an horarium to kind of protect that from going overboard and causing problems. Okay. Then she speaks about, for example, confessors. She said, now I'm going to confess. This is all stuff with religious life, but it applies. Confessors. She said, now some of these confessors, you're going to go to this priest and they confess, and they got some vanity. And they have some vanity in them, and you can pick up on it, and it's not helping you. You see, well, she says, go to another confessor. So she said, get a good confessor. You need a good confessor. And then she tells the superiors, she said, no, that's in our constitution, but the superiors, you have to allow them to use a confessor. You know, they can control which ones, but they have to be able to have some freedom in where they go to confession. Because she said, bad confessors or vain confessors have done me much harm. And so she goes on, particularly to the prioresses of her convents, in particular here's St. Joseph, Agnes of Jesus, I guess it would be, that she has to be open and respect their freedom to be able to change confessors if the confessor is not helping or is too interested in them, because sometimes the confessor is interested, you see, in the sister, or curious about their spiritual lives, and more about that than about God. Okay, so she says, to go ahead and change confessor, and of course do it without hurting his reputation. She says, you see, don't go blasting, you know, Acadian or Catholic or something, but don't, you see, but do it discreetly and just go somewhere else. Okay, so she speaks about that, this freedom of confessors. And then with regard to detachment, she says that we have to be detached, number one, from ourselves. You see, we come into the monastery, but we come with ourselves. And the greatest, she said, the greatest obstacle to our spiritual life is ourselves. St. Jerome found this out when he left Rome because of the dancing girls, he said, and because of the craziness in Rome, and he went to Jerusalem, and he went in the cave, you see, and the dancing girls were still in his head. Now, the only common, you see, denominator was Jerome, basically. And so we are our worst enemies in many ways. So we have to be detached from ourselves. Well, what? Then she goes on to a number of things. Well, one, my honor, my rights. See, in America, my rights. And any little injustice that's seen, then I want to get my rights. Well, in community, family, marriages, the world, road rage, there's going to be some, you see, crossing one another. And we have to be willing to be able to see that spiritually and not stand up for our own rights all the time. Okay, because this is ridiculous. Of course, the devil feeds that. So she said we have to be detached from our own honor and not worry about being slighted all the time. Okay, so this is an important aspect. She says, no matter how much we have been loved, what is there that remains for us? As a result, you shouldn't care whether you are loved or not, unless the love is for your spiritual benefit, as in the case of those perfect souls I mentioned. She's talking about spiritual friendships that are with holy people. That friendships are very important, but find a friend a lot better than you, a lot more virtuous than you, and talk to somebody that's a lot holier than you, that has your good, that'll tell you you're lazy when you're lazy and you're crazy when you're crazy, to quote Father Fry. So the spiritual friendships, to become friends with a saint and to talk about God with a saint is going to do you a lot of good, you see. But a lot of times we talk spiritual stuff and it's not, you see, holy. She says, and then I'm trying to find the text here. With regard to detachment, she says, well, of course, she mentions detachment from oneself and one's own honor, and then a big thing on relatives. Now you see in Louisiana, you say relatives, but she's speaking about in the monastery and religious. She's saying, I'm telling you, she says, I'm not talking about your parents. We owe them, and as long as it's not hurting your spiritual life, you know, you can't just stand aloof from your parents when they come to visit on a home visit or whatever. But she said about relatives, she said, I've seen so much harm from relatives and this attachment to relatives. Okay, now Jesus, you know, this is a big thing in Jesus of Nazareth with Pope Benedict about Jesus takes his relationship outside of his familial blood relationship and he opens it to all of us. Thanks, we're the beneficiaries of that. But that is a little bit of a difficult and painful on the relatives because your brothers and your sisters, your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside and they wish to speak to you. And Jesus says, who's my mother, who's my brother and sister? Those who hear the word of God. He points to the ones in his midst are brother, mother, sister to me. And that I'm sure Mother Mary bore that, you see, with great, great holiness and humility, but I'm not so sure his cousins did the same. I remember one time I was at Holy Rosary, and it was my birthday, and I think it was Melanie Pogue was the receptionist, and I was seeing a spiritual directee, and I was in session, so my mother and my sister came to bring me a coconut meringue pie, which was like my favorite for my birthday, and the receptionist didn't know my mom, and So I was and so she said, well, I'd like to lead this for Father Mike for his birthday. And she said, well, he's busy right now, he can't see you. Said, well, that's okay, I'll just leave it here. And I said, well, sure, and just tell him his mother and his sister said happy birthday. Oh, you're his mom? Oh, wait. And she said, no, don't disturb me. So sure enough, bam, 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 and knocked at the door and says, Father, your mother and your sister are here and they want to speak to you. And I said, who's my mother? Who's my sister? Yeah. And the Cokeman meringue almost went airborne. So don't try this at home, But the idea about relatives, Teresa, you got to know the context, but this still remains true, that bishops will tell you, religious superiors and novice mistresses and masters will tell you that family is often, a difficulty with regard to persons becoming a priest, even more so a religious. Mothers keep a lot of their children, boys, from being priests or from religious communities. There's, unfortunately, not always the kind of proper support, and that kind of healthy detachment. Of course, this is big in America for all of us because mothers and fathers often don't, because of smaller families and because of whatever, that they don't detach that easily from their children. And because of that, and kids have concupiscence, and so they milk that until they're 50, 60, for it's worth for them. And then there's resentment and everything else. So there needs to be some clear break so that we can deal with our relatives as fellow adults. And that's a huge thing today, so I think it's worth saying about that it does circumvent many religious vocations. And she says our attachment to relatives. Okay. Now, she spoke about attachment to oneself, detachment from ourselves and from relatives. And this connection with detachment from ourselves, the body. She speaks about the body, and it's worth saying, Teresa of Jesus suffered poor health, as you know. We went through that in our first session, but she had a lot of different illnesses and stuff. But she says, you came to the monastery to die for Christ, not to live comfortably for Christ. So she speaks about our way of life as religious. Okay, we didn't come to live comfortably for Christ in the monastery. We came to die for Christ in the monastery, in religious life. She said, the devil suggests that you indulge yourselves so that you can keep the observance of the order. I need to take care of myself because, man, I got a tough life here. He said, the bells will be ringing shortly, and so let me indulge a little more. So the devil suggests that. And then a nun will so eagerly want to strive to care for and preserve her health for the sake of keeping the observance of the order that she dies without ever having kept the observance entirely for a single day. You see? Well, I don't know why she has come here. Now she's talking to her sisters. Mother, you ought to read Mother Teresa's scathing letters to the sisters about some of these things. She says, she goes, we don't keep some of the very ordinary things of the rules, such as silence, which isn't going to do us any harm. Okay, so I'm worried about hurting my health. Well, silence is not going to make me go nuts. I mean, hardly does our head begin to ache, then we stop going to choir, singing the divine office, because I got a headache. That's why she's the patron saint of headaches, by the way. The sisters gave her a headache. No, she suffered from headaches all the time, the Teresa of Avila. She goes, hardly does our head begin to ache, then we stop going to choir, which won't kill us either. Not too many nuns have died because they forced themselves to go to choir when they had a headache. We stay away one day because our head ached, another because it was just now aching, and 3 more so that it won't ache again. And we seek to invent penances in our heads with the result that we can neither do the penances nor keep the observance. And at times the illness is slight, but we think we aren't obliged to do anything since we've done our duty by asking permission. She says, she goes, oh God, help me, this complaining among nuns. May he forgive me, but I fear it has already become a custom. Once there was a nun who complained to me about a headache, and she complained a great deal about it. When it came time to examine her, the head didn't ache at all, but she felt an ache somewhere else. It was a moving pain. Anyway, her idea with regard to health, that prudence, but the human prudence, the devil will use that and exaggerate fears, where we can't do any mortification at all. And then she's about the whole cult of the body, the body, and that's where we're at today with the cult of the body. And the body is going to rot. We got to realize that. This cult of the body, if we spent the amount of time in the weight room, and taking care of our bodies, if we took that time with virtue or with prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, we'd all be, Padre Pios. Okay? So if we could but the devil tempts us that's something that we have. in moderation, huh? Everything in moderation and not too much of that. Okay, that was Father Fry's grandma. Everything in moderation, not too much of that. But the idea is that Teresa of Jesus is hitting something that is very common today in our own. You see, we're so much about our health to the point of, you see, never getting around to the spiritual life. The devil exaggerates these things, okay? All right, so these things she speaks about with regard to, and then with regard to humility, and she ties it along with detachment. Humility of, you see, knowing, and at the end of her work she does this as well, but knowing who you are and who you're not, this humility before God, knowing humility, that if it's true humility, that it doesn't cause this consternation and this agitation and scrupulosity. That if the devil, you see, is giving us a false humility, the result of a false humility will avoid prayer because we're not worthy. I'm not worthy to go, so we won't go to communion anymore. We're not in mortal sin, but I'm not worthy to go to, so I stay away from communion. I stay away from adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. I stay away from prayer because I feel unworthy to go to prayer, okay? And that's fostered by the devil. Or this consternation, okay, this agitation. But she said, no, knowing who we are, knowing we're sinners before God, and knowing who God is and who we are and who we're not, is this humility that comes from God, and it brings a peace, and it brings a boldness, and it brings a zeal. And we know the devil by the tail, by the end result. And so she speaks about this necessity of this humility. This is what Jesus says in the gospel today: learn of me, I'm meek and humble of heart. Of this humility, the humility of Mary. The Lord has done great things for me in a lowliness. Holy is his name. So she addresses these virtues. Now, with regard to the Our Father, and I'm going to just give about 10 minutes on that and conclude. With regard to the Our Father, what she does is she says, for example, that the people are complaining about this. They're complaining, or they're issuing all kinds of concerns about these books on mental prayer, and so she says that. They give all these complaints about it, and then they say the Our Father and the Hail Mary should be enough. That's all they need. And she said, well said, it is, because Christ gave it to us. And then she does it. That becomes, she feeds off of that, and that's how she gives us this commentary on the Our Father for these like 14 chapters in the Way of Perfection, which is the bulk of her work, this big section in the back of the Way of Perfection. And what she does there is she says that the method is that we are praying our vocal prayers without thinking about who we're speaking to. And so she says mental prayer, this mental prayer is this recognizing who I'm speaking to, the fact that I'm speaking, and what I'm trying to address to the one I'm speaking to. So she says, don't you realize if it's just a guy off the street, how we address him and how we address a prince, that we have to know who we're speaking to and the proper protocol, that we would be much, I mean, if it's the Pope, the door opens and it's the Holy Father, my attentiveness and what I say and my attentiveness is much different than just be with my brothers and sisters, perhaps growing up. I'm not taking them for granted, and so I'm not that conscious. I'm answering and I'm busy about something else. But when you have such a dignified person, then we have to be attentive. So she says you can't have true vocal prayer unless your mind is attentive to the one you're speaking to. And she said it would be a lot better that we wouldn't be doing all these prayers. And Jesus says don't babble on like the pagans. So just rattling on the prayers, it would be a lot better that we would pray one Our Father, she said, with some attentiveness than thousands without the attentiveness. Okay. Now this is the problem we know. I get in my own prayer the same way. But certainly, like hearing confession, people make an act of control, they get out, you swear they're going to have a panic attack, or they need oxygen, because, or you try to go say the rosary before Mass, and you can't keep up. But they're obviously not thinking about the words that they're saying. It's impossible for the mind to be able to have that kind of attentiveness. So those are vocal prayers that have really no meaning at all. That we have to, she said, all we have to do in this simple mode is for vocal prayer to be real prayer. I can't be thinking about something else when I'm saying my vocal prayer. I can't be writing a homily while I'm saying the rosary. I can't be somewhere else. So if I'm really saying the words that Jesus spoke to me, and I say that, I have to say them with meaning, and I have to say them with attentiveness, and realize what I'm saying, what I'm asking, and who it is that I'm addressing, and who I am asking him that. And if we would do that, and we would force ourselves to do that, that's mental prayer. And if we start with mental prayer, and of course, nobody can argue, nobody's going to take the Our Father from you. They might take your books from you, but you don't need the books. They're right about that. We got the Our Father. But if we say the Our Father in that manner, and we say the Hail Mary in that manner, then what's going to happen is we're really praying. And what happens is we dispose ourselves to this prayer of recollection, which is this fruit of praying with attention. And then this prayer of recollection puts us in a situation of being disposed to enter into the prayer of quiet, which is supernatural prayer, when the Lord, you see, begins to teach us and it takes our heart. Okay, and then that prayer. Then the next step, if we behave appropriately and continue to practice virtue and be humble with our will, because He's grabbing our will and loving us. If we continue to show Him and prove our love to Him outside of those encounters of prayer, and we don't get all disturbed, you see, about our intellect scurrying about like a lightning bug over the lights, then gradually the Lord will take the intellect and collect all in the house in His prayer of union. And then we'll drink deeply of the living waters, and we'll be longing for death to be at home with the Lord. And that soul, that true friend of God, will do much more good in defending the church against the problems that we're having and the strife. Okay? So this is the development that she does. So she begins with this, with the Our Father, and she says, of course, with regard to this praying of the Our Father, that the Lord gave this prayer Himself. Now, one of the unique things about Teresa of Jesus that I haven't seen in other commentaries, and she's not really commentating, she's giving thought, she says. She says, I'm not writing a commentary. But Teresa has Jesus giving us this prayer and Jesus praying this prayer, and certain petitions more appropriately of Jesus praying this prayer. So, and he's saying, Our Father. It's not just, as the Catechism says for Teresa, that it's ours. It's not just my Father, it's also your Father. But Jesus is identifying with us, you see, our Father. You see, Michael and me, our Father in heaven. So he's identifying with me because I'm baptized and giving this prayer. So Jesus is praying this prayer with me. That's a very powerful insight of Teresa. Now, this is huge with Teresa, because Teresa is going to give a practice. She's going to give a little method for becoming recollected. She's going to give a method. Of course, now, obviously, mental prayer means attentive to the one I'm speaking to, and knowing who I am. But it has to do with presence. Practice of the presence of God. See, Teresa says the whole problem and why we get distracted in prayer and why we get frustrated and why we don't make progress in prayer is because God's way up there. Now, this is very deep with Teresa of Jesus, is that God is dwelling within you. And He's very, very close. And she says, we don't have to be shouting. The teacher is next to the student. The master is close to his pupil. And as a pupil, I don't have to holler at the teacher, because the teacher is hovering over my desk, helping me with my lesson. And so I can whisper, and he's very close. The teacher's very close to me. And so we have to practice this presence of God and this realization that God's very close to me. And so I can communicate as friends. That's huge in Teresa. And if we can develop that and break through and get that into our mentality through practice, regular practice in the presence of God, then we're speaking to Him, conversing Him as a friend. So then she says, like praying the Our Father. When I'm praying the Our Father, she says, first is, she said, just Our Father, just to say Our Father. That she said, I don't see how we don't become perfect contemplatives with that one prayer. She said, I know Teresa of Jesus is saying this because she's giving us a method. She's trying to show how the Our Father contains in itself the whole progress of prayer. It's vocal prayer, it's mental prayer, it's prayer of recollection, it's prayer of quiet, it's prayer of union, it's perfect contemplation, longing for death in the mystical marriage. That whole prayer. And she says that what she's doing in that context of teaching that prayer, the Our Father, she's saying that to be able to be attentive to whom we speak to, if we can use that Lord's Prayer, that that one prayer can make us a contemplative in a moment, okay? And she's writing for people like herself who said that she couldn't focus her mind to make a discursive meditation. Her intellect was not, her imagination wasn't that very good, which I don't know, is pretty good when you think about all her imagery that she uses. But her intellect, she said, my mind was like a wild horse running all over the place. And I know a lot of sisters, that we have a lot of you in the convent that have like a wild horse. And so you can't make a discursive meditation, focus your intellect on truths in a discursive meditation style. So I'm going to teach you a method which you can do that just by saying your vocal prayers. If you do them in a mental prayer, then you can make rapid progress and be as contemplative, if you will, as the other sisters. All right. So she starts with the Our Father and saying Our Father, this loving Father who art in heaven. And she's saying that he dwells in heaven. He's right here with us. We share him with Jesus, and he dwells in heaven. And so this reality of the one we're speaking to. And so she does whole reverence, and she goes through this whole preference and reference just to think. So we say the words and mean what we say and think about what we're saying. Then we have true prayer, it's mental prayer. And gradually, if we do that several times a day, praying the Our Father slowly several times a day, and being attentive to the one that's very close to us, who's at the same time in heaven, and heaven is within, the kingdom of God is within, Jesus says, then we will shortly, she said, in a period of about 6 months to a year, we'll arrive at this prayer of recollection. So she's saying in a very short period of time, if we practice this method. Of course, she emphasizes the method. Now, prayer of recollection is not supernatural prayer, but it's the fruits of labors, and she said it is a labor. You're going to struggle with this because you're not accustomed to it, to slow down and to stop and think what. I can say these things without thinking about them. I've said them so often. I can say them in my sleep. I could actually say the rosary and lead the rosary and write a homily at the same time. I've done it. Sorry to say. So we can get very distracted and we can actually multitask. But you can never multitask because what I'm saying in my rosary is not prayer at all. It's not even vocal prayer because I have to be attentive to the one I'm speaking to. And if I'm not attentive to the one I'm speaking to, then the prayer doesn't have any hearing before God. And if I am attentive by just using those words of Jesus, then what's going to happen is I'm going to be overcome with awe, and I'm going to start to have this recollection. I'm going to start to become recollected. And as it were, my faculties will start to be encircled, if you will, and I'll be attentive. And if I do this several times during the day, this little practice through just the recitation of the Our Father, for example, as Teresa tells us how to do it, then I'm going to develop this recollection. And I'll enter into, by praying vocal prayers, I'll enter into prayer of recollection. And prayer of recollection is this simple prayer being simplified and gazing upon the one I'm speaking to, that I'm start talking to the Pope, and I get kind of gaga, and I just become overwhelmed, you see, with the presence of the Pope, because I all of a sudden become aware of whom I'm speaking to, and I'm overwhelmed with it. And that happens, you see, in our vocal prayers. Okay, so that's where it starts. And then, of course, for Teresa of Avila, moving, she goes through the different petitions. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. So she's praying for thy kingdom and thy will to be done. She sees here, and she addresses moving from the prayer of recollection, which is acquired through our own efforts, to this prayer of quiet, where the heart is captured. Now, we already spoke about that and what that means in the Book of Her Life, as well as in Interior Castle. But here she uses another image. She uses the image of a baby suckling at the breast. She says, we're like an infant. And the Lord's, I'll caress you at the breast. This is an image from Isaiah. And it was very important for Teresa of Lisieux in her little way, you see. And she said the baby's suckling at the breast, and so the mother just, at some point, just pours milk into the mouth of the little baby. So it doesn't have to do the work of the suckling, or like going with the well, use the bucket, okay? So I don't have to do this labor. It becomes easier. I have to do some work, but the work is just swallowing the milk. The only thing I'm really doing is the milk's in my mouth, and I'm swallowing it. And she said that's this prayer of quiet where the will is captured by God. Now, when this begins to happen in prayer, I shouldn't go out there and try to be too greedy and try to run down my intellect and my memory that's thinking about things and my imagination and try to capture, you see, that butterfly that's fluttering around, or that moth that's fluttering around, or the mosquito, you see, at night. and try to catch it and bring it down. If I do, I'm going to do harm. I'm going to spill the milk. You see, in trying to reach for something else, the milk that's being poured into my mouth gently without my labor is going to be spilled and it will be wasted. And so the importance of just let the intellect do its tricks and just be focused on God. So this is important direction we give people in that form of prayer, not to be so concerned about trying to rein in their intellect. As long as there's nothing there pulling their heart, you see, out of that union. So this is the difference between distractions as a beginner, when I'm distracted about my motorcycle, and all I think about during my meditation is my motorcycle, and my motorcycle. If the motorcycle keeps coming up in my prayer, day in and day out, it's probably because I'm attached to the motorcycle, okay? Or the car, or I'm thinking about a friend, or somebody hurt me, and I get angry, and I'm thinking about what they said to me. Okay, well, because I'm attached to my honor. I'm attached to and a person embarrassed me publicly, so it's my vanity or something. Or a person said I was looking a little pudgy, I gained some weight, and that's all I think about during my holy hour. Okay, so that could reveal to me my attachments. Now that's the significant. Outside of prayer, I reflect about what my distraction was. When we're talking about here, when this person starts to be, their will is being taken by God, and the intellect, these distractions, these things they don't connect. They're just flutterings about. This thought, that thought, this thought, but the heart is not, you see, is not attached to that. Okay, that's to say, and you know the difference when you experience it. And so somebody in spiritual direction might be seeing for that. You tell them just ignore the kid. You're talking to somebody, you're enthralled in a conversation, and the kid's pulling at you, Mama, I need to go, Mama. And every time you turn and say, hey, now be quiet. You listen to it, I told you to be quiet. Every time you do that, the little kid gets greater strength, and next thing you know, you get frustrated, you break your intimacy in the conversation, and you get pulled down. What you have to do is ignore the kid and continue to be fixed on enjoying the conversation that you're having. The kid will get tired, you see, and leave you alone or flutter about. But that's your attentiveness should be allowing the will to be loved by God. Just swallow the milk that you're being given, you see, and not be too guilty about to be too greedy. All right, so that's the important teaching, that repetitive in Teresa of Jesus. And then she moves from there when she speaks about thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and moving into more, you see, to the prayer of union. This prayer of union where then by some unknown fashion, the milk is actually, you don't even have to swallow it. The milk is giving right into you. It's in some marvelous way that you enjoy this intimacy. You don't necessarily understand how it's happening, but the milk is just being given without very little labor. Again, with Teresa, she mentions this throughout about less and less labor required, you see, to be strengthened, like the water for the garden, here the milk for the little baby. Okay, and then she moves, speaking about give us this day our daily bread. And the daily bread for Teresa is the means to this intimacy, the Eucharist. Of course, she speaks about realizing when we're praying that, about the significance of the Holy Communion. She treats about spiritual communion. She said about like a little fire, a spiritual communion. If we open our hands and we put our hands next to the candle, the little fire, as long as we're disposed, we can be warmed a great deal from a little fire. And that's spiritual communion, because they couldn't receive communion as often as we can, but they receive with greater fervor the few times they received. So she emphasizes spiritual communions and the intimacy of communion, and she speaks about that temple, how all these images and these representations that the mind does, and the imaginations and the pondering and everything else, how inferior that is to the reality being present, that all these mysteries that we ponder are in us in Holy Communion, and that there's no more fervent time to ask favors of the King, if you will, to be intimate. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was very pointed on this particular thing. She used to ask her sisters after Mass, then they'd go like to breakfast, she'd go and she'd ask the little sister, what did you tell Jesus? What did Jesus tell you in Holy Communion? And what did you tell Jesus? But she'd want to know what they were speaking about as they made their thanksgiving. So Mother Teresa of Jesus speaks about the thanksgiving after communion. So lost in our churches. The priest is supposed to make a thanksgiving if it hasn't happened before the end of the Mass, at the end of Mass, but to spend some time with the people before the closing prayer, after the hymn or the song, but silence. To be able to be in silence with the one you love in that intimate communion. So spending a number of minutes in silence of intimacy, and powerful things are happening, not just out of reverence, but the intimacy, the fruitfulness of being disposed to that presence. So Teresa of Jesus speaks tremendously about that as a means. And she says, I can't see Jesus in this contemplative moment of teaching us this prayer and praying, the heights of contemplation, speaking about material food. You see, that I don't think Jesus was speaking about giving us this day our daily bread, about our hamburgers and rice and food for the day. Now she said, now this has meaning too, materially, and of course the Catechism says that, but she said Jesus is speaking about this super substantial food of himself. And so she says, sisters, we are spouses of Christ. Pray that he come today to you. Pray that you would never be seen without your spouse. This Holy Communion, to be in communion with your spouse. Mother Teresa would say, sister, go to chapel. Tell Jesus, I'm your spouse. I have rights over you. Love me. You see, I need you to love me right now. So that was the importance of the spousal relationship of the nun with Christ, this Holy Communion. Okay, and of course, our Father, and she emphasizes here, giving us Holy Communion. The word in Greek, epiousios, daily, but it's seen just philologically in the Catechism as this supersubstantial food, this bread that has a super substance, namely God himself, come down from heaven, John 6, and the Last Supper, our Eucharist. Okay, and then she continues on there about forgive us our, sins as we forgive those who have forgiven us. She goes into a long thing about hurts and forgiveness and bearing with unjust harm and hurts and not complaining about it. She says that the petition means we've already done this, sisters. We've already forgiven those who have offended us, and it's already a fait accompli already. And we can't have perfect contemplation without this forgiveness. And so she speaks about that as a prerequisite for being in intimate union with God. And, of course, speaks a lot about unjust. She says here, this person in the prayer of union. The person in the prayer of union, one of the signs of a person in prayer of union is that they are bearing, calumny, unjust, injuries, sins against them without complaining and forgiving. Bearing it joyfully for the love of Christ. To rejoice, to have some share in the sufferings that Christ went. And of course, there's always reference to your spouse. Your spouse has endured these things, and so why should we not? And what a joy to be able to share some fashion with your spouse. And then asking for deliverance from evil. She says not to be souls here. We're not afraid of the public enemies. We're not afraid of those who are lying about us and try to hurt our physical bodies. What we're afraid of, and here she speaks about fear and love, these two kind of foot soldiers that have to guide us. Fear and love. She says we have to be afraid of the deception of the devil. We have to have the humility to always progress with some fear and trembling, as Paul would say. This fear that the devil can deceive me. Not so much this fear and paranoia, but asking God and asking him regularly to save me from deception, to save me from thinking that I have virtues. The devil's going to at this point, the devil wants to convince you that you have virtues that you don't have. And always to see, to be doubtful about your own virtues. You see, and to see virtues of others with a greater certitude than your own virtues. Because the devil, she said here, will often deceive you by making you think you're holier than you really are. Okay, that's why we experience a lot of frustration in confession when we have a fall or a sin, and they throw a big fracas, a big to-do. Why? Well, they're manifesting, or I'm manifesting, my sin of vanity. I thought I was a lot holier than I am. I'm so surprised by this sin of mine. Father, this hasn't happened in years. This doesn't happen that way. This is not normal for me. Well, harping about that is obviously, vanity, which, sometimes I might remind, you want to confess vanity as well while we're here, because it's being manifested as the dominant, the sin we probably should be confessing. But this is the devil's deception and how we can be so easily deceived. She said we have to beg God, and Jesus says it, that we beg not to be from the deceiver. And then this and deliver us from evil, amen. This delivery and the amen and delivering from evil. She said definitive evil is that at this point longing for death and wanting to be with God. This is at the Our Father. If we make it that far from not the flights of contemplation that would happen by praying it prayerfully, she says that Jesus prayed that way. Jesus identifies with us about delivering us from evil, and amen. This delivery from evil that Jesus taught with his passion and taught longing to definitively redeem the world. And she said he manifests that by saying, with great desire, I desire to eat this meal with you before I suffer. And so she summarizes this prayer, and then she speaks about fear and love, the love of God and the fear of misstepping. And finally, as she concludes in the last two chapters, says some beautiful things about, for religious and sisters, she says, and this applies to all of us, she says, look, she says, be affable. She says, it's the worst thing in the world. You religious, you live in a virtuous life. You live in the better path. And she said the reason why people don't want to join you is because you're doing it, and you do it tensely. And you do it with such tension and so fear. She said, no, we have to fear. Fear goes ahead always. Fear goes ahead to lead, lest we misstep. But with this confidence, with this joy, you see, not trusting ourselves, but trusting completely in God. And she says, because you live a virtuous life, and you live it, and people recognize that, but they don't want to join you because you're so tense, and you're so uptight. She said, loosen up and trust. And she says, the joy, and don't go crawl up in a corner. She says, greet people and love people and enjoy people and let them enjoy your presence. Now, she said, when you're young in the spiritual life, you have to be careful. If it's worldly conversation, is this or that, then you have to flee that because it's going to harm you. But she says, you get a little more advanced and you go, and people come on, they get on your plane. I know you just go and you just show up, and they know you're a friend of Jesus. And so they're not going to talk about your friend because they don't want to offend you. And she said, holy people, men of God and servants of God have done great good in begetting virtue by not even opening their mouth. You see, in the presence. So I think it's very, very powerful. These last couple of chapters, she's very, very practical, saying, lighten up, be confident, be affable, and enjoy people, and thus you'll be attractive to draw them to your way of life, whether it be a life of virtue or actual vocation, say to the priest of a religious life. You see, don't you want to be like me? Is he uptight and fearful? No, if people might respect your way of life, but they want no part of it because they perceive you, you see, as being tense, uptight, you see, and having to crawl up and be so against the world. So anyway, this is a long summary of the way of perfection, but it's something that I find has a tremendous amount of just nitty-gritty things about virtue and about love and about the very, very fundamentals of Christianity, which Teresa of Jesus holds as essential in order to make this progress, you see, to perfection, which can only be done by being men and women of prayer. And so this presence of God, and that he's very close to us, and to try to put our mind, our attentiveness, our affections, and say, intend what we mean, to be thinking about what we're saying. So let's end and try to pray the Our Father as Teresa of Jesus would have us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. The Lord be with you. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all. We have some refreshments in the next room and some coffee. Next week, Friday, we don't have class because I'll be out doing a retreat, but we'll finish up our series in 2 weeks, so not this coming Friday, but the following. I guess it's the 26th of June. And we're going to treat, there's other writings, less known writings, some of her letters, poetry, commentary on the Song of Songs, foundations, but some excerpts from some of the other writings of Teresa of Jesus, less known. There are some, I have some chords for the anniversary prayers, so I'll pass them out, as well as we have a day of recollection a week from tomorrow, on vocations. So if you know any young or not so young people that are interested in a vocation, priesthood, religious life, men or women, we'll have a day of recollection on June the 20th from 9 to 3. So I encourage you, if they're under 18, just they have to come with a guardian. So you can make the day of recollection with them. Okay? Thank you.